Konnichiwa. Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Beamer. I want to thank SPARC Japan for inviting me to participate in this really important panel and conversation on licensing rights. I've been invited to talk to you about the current state of rights retention in the United States. I'm looking forward to telling you about what is currently happening in the US and what the future looks like in light of the 2022 Nelson OSTP memorandum. I'm also very much looking forward to questions and discussions later today and in the future. In the complex landscape of open access policies, funders increasingly demand immediate open access to their funded research, while universities strive to ensure compliance without unnecessary costs. However, within this context, rights retention emerges as a powerful tool. It permits researchers to publish their work openly in subscription-based journals without incurring article processing charges, a suggestion that resonates with budget-conscious universities. Nevertheless, this approach is seen as a potential threat to the established business models of publishers. Thus, rights retention becomes a tug-of-war between funders and publishers, with researchers often caught in the middle of this ongoing struggle. I think you can see from the comments that I've presented here that this struggle is really important for solving many global challenges with the sharing of research. And many librarians and researchers in the United States agree with these comments. So, what has rights retention looked like in the United States in the recent past and present? In response to this struggle of authors' rights in the US, many institutions started to adopt and are still using the Harvard approach as a way to retain authors' rights. Harvard faculty voted to give the university non-exclusive rights to their future journal articles, and Harvard University granted the same rights back to their faculty. As of 2022, there are 81 open access declared policies based on rights retention in the United States, the majority of which are being adopted and emulating the Harvard approach. The Harvard policy approach still exists and requires researchers to grant a non-exclusive, irrevocable, paid-up worldwide license to exercise any and all rights under copyright relating to each of his or her scholarly articles in any medium, and to authorize others to do the same, provided that the articles are not sold for a profit. Authors can then provide a copy of each accepted article for distribution in a repository under these conditions. And crucially, a waiver is available for any publication that the researcher does not wish to make open access on a no questions basis. In the years that followed the Harvard open access policy, commercial publishers successfully devised a number of business models that allowed gold open access to flourish and stemmed the tide of rights retention policy adoption. So we have Plan S, the policy framework developed by a coalition of research funders that came into effect in 2021. Plan S is also being practiced by institutions and individual authors, though mostly in Europe, but having a direct effect on the United States. Unlike the Harvard approach, which makes open access the default, but allows for exceptions for subscription access, the Coalition S rights retention strategy sits within a complex list of requirements for which the endpoint must be immediately CC BY open access. This strategy allows researchers to publish CC BY open access in a repository without paying a fee, which is why it has received renewed attention in Europe, of course, where many Coalition S funders are based. Some funders provide text that must be included in the submitted manuscript to inform the publisher of the intention of rights retention. Of course, there are also many other ways that we are using in the United States, too many to cover in this short presentation. Those include author negotiations, author addendums, creation of institutional intellectual property policies and compliance policies, and a blending of the two above, the Harvard approach and Plan S. So for more details on this, I suggest reading Peter Suber's excellent and evolving methods of rights retention. Rights retention has also been encouraged by U.S. institutions, academic institutions, when a researcher wishes to publish in a hybrid journal. For example, subscription journals that make individual articles open access through article processing charges, or GOLD, but when the researcher does not have the funding to do so. Under longstanding policy, federal agencies already receive a license to any copyrighted work created within federal funds that authorize the agency to make broad use of the work for federal purposes and authorize others to do so. This federal license empowers the agency to extensively utilize the work for federal purposes and grant others the same. It's probable that this federal policy already confers the necessary authority to mandate the provision of publicly accessible copies of scholarly publications. But some universities have gone a little bit farther, adding these policies to their intellectual property policies by assigning copyright ownership in scholarly works to individual creators rather than the university. Many of these university copyright or IP policies already include provisions that allow for adherence to the licensing requirement by altering the default distribution of rights. This is typically achieved through universities specifying that the ownership of all rights in the work produced under a grant or through the declaration of the university will retain the requisite portion of rights to fulfill grant or contract obligations. And I think it's easier to understand when you actually go and read what those intellectual property policies are. And so I've provided two at the University of Texas, also Stanford's, and you can see the type of form that you need to fill out to adhere to policies and licensing at the University of Wisconsin. So, time to look to the future, or Back to the Future, one of my favorite movies. You might be familiar with the SPARC US Author Addendum. It's a really great tool that was created in the early years of open access for government-funded researchers. In general, you would apply this addendum when you were negotiating with publishers. And this tool became very important for any author wanting to have their work openly licensed. However, the issue is that using a tool like this puts all of the responsibility on the researcher. Looking into the future, we can learn from the practices we know now about how researchers, institutions, agencies, and how publishers will assert their rights earlier on in the process. If we want to encourage researchers to assert their rights, then we need to assist them in doing this. And we need to somehow build into our policies, our agency requirements, that we need full reuse rights to allow the full utility of scientific articles, for example, in text and data mining and AI. We also must need the rights to go beyond, and that includes data. Just the ability to post articles in a public repository is essential. And these policies need to be built in at the point of creation of the scholarship, rather than the author having to assert their rights after the fact. Outputs need to have full reuse rights. So recognizing that this is the difficulty of individual authors to assert their own rights in agreements with publishers, SPARC North America worked with several legal experts in the US including Creative Commons and the Authors Alliance to put together guidance for federal agencies in light of the OSTP memo. As mentioned previously, the US has a federal purpose license, which means the government reserves a royalty-free, non-exclusive, and irrevocable right to reproduce, publish, or otherwise use outputs of federally funded research for federal purposes and to authorize others to do so. So this document that was created by SPARC North America offers recommendations to ensure that publicly funded scholarly publications comply with copyright law and with the 2020 OSTP memorandum's requirement for accessibility to the American public and scientific community. It suggests using policy and contract language to ensure grantees make peer-reviewed scholarly publications accessible without delay. Federal agencies already possess those licenses, and those can be leveraged for that purpose. This document further advises agencies to obtain additional copyright licenses from grantees to solidify those public access rights, with the specifics of those licenses tailored to the agency's access obligations. The contract language grants the agency these additional licenses at the moment of publication, safeguarding them against conflicts with author agreements. Additionally, the document recommends including information about the licenses with publicly accessible scholarly publications, ideally through a standardized template attached by the author or repository manager. And if you go to that link, you'll be able to see all of the suggestions for using in a template and using with the different agencies, institutions, and future repositories. It's important to note that that document does not cover all aspects of the 2020 OSTP memorandum, such as mandatory repository deposit or metadata requirements. That's in the future. However, these aspects are and will be addressed as U.S. federal agencies continue to ask for and receive public responses to their plans. SPARC North America has been providing public comments to the federal agencies as our plans for the 2020 memo are released. And you can read those plans and comments on their website. Many of the comments focus on ensuring that policies are updated to guarantee equity in both the publishing and access to the record of science, particularly for traditionally underserved communities and researchers who are in their early careers. One such example of these comments in SPARC's public comments on page 3 of this NASA public comment is that they recommend NASA explicitly emphasizes the availability of compliance options that do not present financial barriers. They also recommend that authors who may be encouraged to pay added open access fees in circumstances where they are unnecessary for compliance should be clarified, and that any charges from publishers are publication charges, not compliance charges. It's critical that authors do not conflate compliance with article processing charges. We also see recommendation for institutional repositories run by libraries and other research institutions that do not charge authors or generally do not charge authors to deposit articles or manuscripts. These kinds of recommendations ensure that we will be building a better future of rights retention. So thanks for listening as I touched upon the current and future state of U.S. rights retention. While I cannot speak on behalf of all of the U.S., my personal feeling is that there is extensive public engagement with stakeholders across the research publication ecosystem, and this has made it a very exciting time. It's my hope that conversations between academic publishers, for-profit and not-for-profit organizations, libraries and universities, scholarly societies, and members of the general public can lead to a more equitable system of scholarly communication that permits the immediate sharing of accepted articles. Thank you. ありがとうございました。